Hello and welcome to this episode of The Inspired Attorney. I'm your host, Sharon V. In this episode, we are speaking with Debbie Hoffman. In part one, Debbie talks to us about her journey as an attorney, which started in real estate finance, led to her being general counsel of a technology startup, to where now she is an entrepreneur and CEO of a blockchain advisory company. She also talks to us about her love of teaching and how she got into it. Hello, Debbie. Thank you for being a part of The Inspired Attorney.
Good morning. Great to see you, Sharon.
So can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Debbie Hoffman. I am the CEO and founder of Symmetry Blockchain Advisors, and I'm also a visiting professor at Barry Law.
Very cool. How did you come to be an attorney?
Well, I come from a family of attorneys. My mother, father, and sister are all attorneys. And so we used to joke around that we talked law at the dinner table. And so the only way to understand our dinner table conversation was to go into law. So I think it was just, natural for me to go into law.
That's awesome. And so how did you decide to get into the area of law that you started in? Because I think you started in real estate, right?
Real estate finance, yes. So I actually was a psychology major in college, and I was very interested in senior citizens. And for a while, I thought I wanted to be a social worker in the area of the elderly. And so when I went to law school, I thought I wanted to do elder law. And I wrote for the law review my paper was on reverse mortgages, which is a way that senior citizens can basically take the equity from their home and live on it, and they never have to leave their house. So I spent a year writing this paper on reverse mortgages because of my interest in elder law, really. And out of law school, my first job was at a real estate firm that picked up the paper, and they did a lot of different things. They did trust and estates and some elder law, but they really picked up the paper and said, oh, she knows real estate finance, and this would be a great area because we do real estate. So I spent a year at that firm, but really that paper took me to my next job, which was a Wall Street firm that really focused on real estate finance. So it's really interesting how sometimes your career gets a little diverted from something you do, not really with that intention. And I've been in real estate finance ever since.
That's really cool. So this job that you were talking about, was that your GC job, or how did you
No,
get
so
into being a general counsel?
Yeah, so I spent a decade at that Wall Street firm representing lenders in real estate finance. So in loan originations on the commercial side, mostly investment banks and some smaller banks, and doing syndications. And it was all on the commercial real estate finance side. I left there actually to become a professor for a little while, and we could talk about that as well. And so I was a professor for a few years at the University of Central Florida. And then after that, well, kind of during that, there was a very interesting company in Orlando called Digital Risk, and it was 2010. They had never had a GC before. It was an entrepreneurial company. So they really found me and asked me to be their first GC. And from kind of there, the company just grew incredibly large. And I don't know, at one point, I think more than quadrupled its size at that time. And then in 2013, it sold to an international company, and really kind of, again, my career just grew from there.
So what was it like, the transition for you?
Transition in terms of which part of that?
Into the role of general counsel and then growing with the company.
Yeah, so being a general counsel is a really fascinating part of an attorney's life. It's not for everybody. At that point, I had worked for a big firm and I had worked as a professor, so I was used to training students and taking on large projects. What I was not used to was all the different hats that a GC wears. You have to be, first and foremost, a business attorney. You have to make business decisions on behalf of your client, and you also have a stake in the client. So you learn very quickly, as an outside counsel, it's a lot easier to say no. When you're a GC, you know that what you say can affect the lifeline of the company. So you really have to understand why would I say no? And is there any other way that we could do this that might push the law in a different direction? Is there any way that we can look at this? So you really look to be creative in a way that and I'm not saying that outside counsel don't do that, but you really are pushed to your limits to do that for sure. Because what ends up happening is if you say no all the time, In a large company, people just look at you as the strict lawyer nobody wants to interact with, who can't figure out how to get deals done. So you really have to be able to learn that business thinking. Another thing is you have to learn a little bit about kind of be a general practitioner. You have to know about employment law. That was the biggest change for me. I'd been a real estate finance attorney for a decade, and all of a sudden these workers' comp issues would come to me, or some question about some employee, and you really have to partner with HR and grow with them and be proactive. And then there's so many other areas that you grow into as a GC. So learning about cyber law, intellectual property, looking at the company's website, and are we compliant with ADA, and things that you're like, oh, I took a class in that in law school, but all of a sudden it's real life. So you wear a lot of different hats, and that's what makes it so much fun and fascinating. You definitely have to know when to call outside counsel. When am I just at the point where, this is too risky for me to make a call on. I've done all the research I can do on it, and we might need to spend a little money, but we really need an outside opinion on this. So you also have to make those calls too. And you obviously don't want to make those calls spending money unless you really have to.
How did you handle those moments where you're in an area of law that was really new to you, and it's one of those situations where you're standing there for your company and you have to wear that hat, and you know that you either have to make the decision of hiring outside counsel, or you harness the confidence to say, I can do this?
Yes, you're absolutely right on the confidence part. So there's a few things. You don't want to be overly confident, but everybody thinks the lawyer knows something about everything, and you don't want to be like, oh, I don't know that. So you do a lot of research. And one of the things I think most lawyers would say this, is that you learn not to be afraid of the unknown. You learn to say, let me look into that, and how to do the research, and how to figure out what might be the answer. What are some options? Now, you can do that. A lot of it you can do yourself, but there's also, at a company, it's interesting. Sometimes there are other resources. There are other people in the company that may have expertise in some part of it that you need to know. Let's say I was in mortgage, some part of the mortgage process, the residential process, I might not have understood. How does this form work? Who signs it? Does the borrower sign it? And then it goes to the lender directly. You have to make sure you understand the business. You might call a colleague, and let's say it's an HR issue, who's another GC, and say, have you ever dealt with this issue before? You might look up on, ACC or other websites. There's a lot of resources that you can use for other GCs who have been through this before. If you're lucky, you might have a staff. I was lucky. I did have a bunch of attorneys that worked with me. Now, they were very junior level attorneys. We did not have that many seniors when we first started, but that doesn't mean you can't completely trust their opinions, and they do research, and you have discussions, and you go back and forth. So what my method would be to learn as much as I can. And then, so for instance, if it's a tax issue, we could learn what we could, but we knew that ultimately we wouldn't know the tax law implication to its fullest extent. So when you call the outside counsel, you're armed with knowing enough to be dangerous, and knowing when they start telling you the beginning of the information, you can say, I get that, but there might be nuggets that you didn't get. And you then, when it happens again, you've learned from them. You've already had some expert advice, so you already grew from that experience.
Is there anything you wish you would have known before you went into that position?
In that, the one thing I would tell most lawyers and most people looking and going into a GC is, it's the finance background. That I was always sorry that I didn't have a stronger finance background. I was a psychology major in undergrad. But when you become a GC, you really have to understand budgets and finance. And the reason is because, so for instance, if you have a potential threatens litigation, what's that going to cost the company? There's a line of business that they're asking you to evaluate, and they're telling you what that could mean for the bottom line of the company. You have to be able to understand the financial implications of your decision making. And if you're lucky, I was very lucky to be involved in the executive decision making. You are part of the finance committee. And so when spreadsheets are going around, you have to really be able to read those. So at the beginning, I can definitely say I struggled a little bit. I got stronger. I still think that it's just something that if I could go back, I would make it a concerted effort to really be a stronger finance partner as a GC.
How would somebody go about doing that without going to college for that degree?
Just the same way I'm telling you about doing research. So there are a number of online courses you can start with courses for lawyer, CLE. There's a number of them. I've noticed them, now. And there's also just 3-day crash courses you can take, or if you want to get an executive degree, you can go and do that, of course. But there's just so much opportunity for education now that, Coursera or your alumni association, or that it really you shouldn't say just because I graduated from law school, I can't learn finance. And so, yes, that's what I would recommend, is go back and take a few. If you haven't been exposed to it in your job, then it's a really good idea to expose yourself to it on your own.
I think that's awesome feedback. Now we're going to transition a little bit because what you're doing now seems totally different. So can you talk to us first, introduce the concept of blockchain for those who don't know it, and then tell us about how you came to create your company?
Yes. So I had a long career in law, as I've talked about, but obviously I have this business passion and the growth of business and the business side of companies. So when I founded Symmetry Blockchain Advisors, I didn't start a law firm. I started an advisory company because I wanted to be able to help my clients with strategic growth and not just the limited aspects of law of the company. And I became passionate about what technology advancement could do for company operations. But that being said, with the law background, I was also able to help companies identify, wow, you need a lawyer in IP, or you need a lawyer in securities. And so what's fascinating about blockchain too is that it's not just one area of law that it touches upon. And so one of the things I'm able to do is help identify the legal needs that the company has. And it might just be as simple as they need corporate formation. They don't have a business org attorney. But as an advisor, you can kind of put together all those pieces. It's not just one type of law or one type of business.
Can you explain what blockchain is?
Yeah, I'll do my best in a quick. So I do a lot of speaking on this, and the reason I do speaking is because people are daunted by it, because they think it's this technology and I'm never going to understand this technology. And I tell business people, you don't have to understand every aspect of the technology. Do you understand the way we're speaking right now? How is our internet working? No, you know that it's working. So you really should understand the properties about it and why it is different from other technologies that we have today. But I will try and give you a little bit of a background about it. It's technology that was originally used by Bitcoin, and that is the electronic cash system. So people equate blockchain with cryptocurrency, but really what it is, it's the technology on which cryptocurrency are built. But that doesn't mean that it can't be used for other types of efforts. It's just that that's how people know of it. So it's the technology on which Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies are built. It's a digital ledger system. And what it means is everything that is done on this digital ledger, or if you want to think about it, if we're lawyers, so you might want to think about it as almost like a Word document or an Excel document, but it's a little bit fancier than that. But everything you do on that Word document is put onto a system that's recorded. And so there's a time and date stamp, so you can always know when it was put on there, and it can be shared. Now, the way we share documents today in Word, for the most part, although there's drives and things, it's in the cloud. So it has similarities to that because it's one document. It's not a copy of a document. So it's recorded and shared, and which means that if I put today is Tuesday onto a ledger, and I want to share it with you, Sharon. I send you a copy on Word and you open it up, or on Google Drive. The idea is that I put it on this ledger and you can access it, the same original document, not a copy of the document, the actual document. So it's recorded on the document and it's shared. And let me give you some of the properties of blockchain that make it unique. The way it's stored is not on one central server or a backup server, the way technology is today. It's stored on a bunch of different computers, and they can be across the world, they could be across the country. It's developed, the technology is developed, however, there's a lot of different blockchains. So however the blockchain is developed, if you can have 100 computers or 100 or 3 computers, that's called a blockchain. And each computer is basically, we refer to them as nodes. So the way blockchain is stored is not on one server, but on these nodes. Okay, that's number one. They call that a decentralized storage system. It's time and date stamped. We talked about that. It's permanent. So everything you put on that blockchain stays permanently and it cannot get erased. And that means, so if I put on that ledger, today is, what did I say, Tuesday? And then I put on that ledger, tomorrow is Wednesday. You cannot erase today is Tuesday once I put in tomorrow's Wednesday. You can, but it's very, very, very difficult. And so that's basically, we call it permanency. It's harder to hack because I just told you it's stored not on one server, remember, but let's say there's 100 servers. In order to hack a blockchain, you have to have 51 computers. They call the 51% of that 100, let's say, servers. So that's a much harder, higher bar to hack. I talked about it's a real-time deposit. It's not a copy, it's real. And the last property, I mean, there's so many things, but I'm trying to nutshell this for everyone, summarize it, is that you can add something of value to this blockchain. So meaning if you want to pay in a supply chain, you're putting today is Tuesday, tomorrow is Wednesday, I will deliver on Thursday, but you can also transfer not just information, but transfer money of sorts so that it's a ledger and a currency at the exact same time. I mean, and we can get into it a lot. There's just so much, but that's a nutshell of it.
Why is this something that attorneys should be aware of, and is something that law firms should integrate?
So if you think about the properties of blockchain, real time, difficult to hack, time and date stamp, as an attorney, think about all the things we do where you need to know, when was that recorded? Who put that in there? Is it possible it was changed or erased? And if so, when? All of these properties are things that we might use in discovery, things we might use in audits. I got interested in it because I did a lot of real estate finance audits. We had, the company I worked for, that I talked about earlier, was licensed in 48 states. At any one time, we could have a state come in and say, hey, we're going to come in 2 weeks to audit you. And so I would have to, in my team, would have to get together all the files, make sure our ducks in a row, and recreate, make sure that we had everything for the auditor to see. If something is stored on a blockchain, you don't have to recreate anything. You can give the auditor access to certain parts of it. You don't even have to give the whole thing. You can, you're trusted knowing it's permanent, that it wasn't erased. It can have the property of showing who put this in and when. You don't have to try and figure that out. So there's just a lot of characteristics about a blockchain that are beneficial to law firms and to businesses, depending on how you want to use it. And that's one of the things I advise about.
Are there ways to, for example, make sure, because if you're dealing with like a general like e-discovery request and you have like a first level review, you want to make sure that no privilege goes out the door. Does blockchain also have ways to make sure that certain content is held back?
Yes. Yeah. A lot of people ask me that question. And especially it also kind of goes with the GDPR question, like how do you destroy things? So there are things that are appropriate to store on a blockchain, and I'll start with this, and there are things that are not appropriate to store on a blockchain. As far as releasing information, yes, there's different types of blockchains. I didn't talk about that. There's public blockchains, which anybody can have access to and full access. There's private blockchains, and the true blockchain aficionados would say, oh, that's not really a blockchain because they're private means there's just somebody controls access. And there's permissioned or I guess I would call them semi-private, semi-public types of blockchains. And that's what we're talking about in business, because in those you are giving an auditor, or in your terms, you are giving the courts or the other side in discovery limited access to what they need to see. And you're kind of opening doors to certain information, but you're not exposing the entire blockchain. So a lot of it depends on the way it's built. Like I said, there's actually thousands of blockchains. And so when you're building it, or when you're working with a partner who already has one, you want to make sure that you're building in those access points correctly.
How would you advise someone to go about even starting this process?
So there's 3 things, and this is what one of my companies does. Usually you're usually a CTO knows about this. There's no question, or CIOs. They are aware of the properties that I'm telling you about. What the bottleneck right now in business is that the executives and the decision makers are not aware of it in a way that they say, oh, I can use this for business. So I start with education, just like this. Oh, wow, this is a new type of technology. I haven't heard about it. So there's so many, once you start digging a little deeper in learning about blockchain, there's some people that are just completely intrigued by what it can do for their businesses. So the business executives that understand the power of it and can kind of have the vision of where it could take their business to the next level, what they end up doing is, first of all, I call it executive education. They learn about it. Second of all, they find strategic partners. So for instance, I had a company yesterday call me. They're a title agency. They're doing a blockchain endeavor. I was able to put this person in touch with another title agencies that's doing it, with another industry player. I don't want to give away too much, but industry player that's working on a blockchain. And you can kind of form your little sandboxes, and sometimes they call them consortiums, and you can have little test cases of where you can use it in your business. And so, again, in my business, I help people make the connections, but there are ways, once you start digging into it, it's just like any other project you do in business. You try to figure out where's my opportunity and who are my partners.
So do you know of small law firms taking advantage of blockchain?
Yes. So there actually is a consortium of law firms that has gotten together there's one central player that I'm thinking of who has gotten a consortium of law firms together, and each have pledged to be a member of this organization and work on a sandbox project and report back to each other. So there actually is at least one organization that I can think of that has gotten this law firms to do it and to talk. And so I think the main thing is you need to talk with your partners. And most of those law firms obviously they have some innovation to them. They understand it. They understand what it can do for them. But by being part of a larger group that's working on these efforts, they can get the benefit of having these discussions on, well, how are you using it and what are you doing? And so, yes, that's definitely out there.
I think that's a greater also lesson in life, is that it really helps you to be open to speak with other people and learn from one another.
Yes, and not be afraid. I mean, so the law firms that are in this, it's all over the country. You can't be afraid of the competition because you're never going to learn. Yesterday, I actually said that to the title agency I was talking to. I said, hey, I'm going to put you in touch with another title agent. I don't know if you're worried about competition. It's not. And he's like, no, not at all. I want to talk to them. I want to figure out what they're doing. Now, they're at two different ends of the country, but law firms we're all over the nation. And there's, I think they can really help each other.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, I want to touch on, what was it like for you switching to creating your own company? Because oftentimes as lawyers, you've had a little bit of a different path, but oftentimes as lawyers, we feel like we need to be a lawyer and stay a lawyer because we got that degree. So yeah. Was there any hesitation on your end, and how did you deal with that?
I love that question, because when I started my company a few years ago, I fought against the lawyer in me. Every time I'd have a conversation and people would refer to me as a lawyer, I would say, I am a lawyer, but that's not how I'm advising you. I would say I have the legal background. And it's really hard to break out of the mold of constantly being seen as a lawyer. It can work to your advantage. Of course, people respect lawyers, but it's really frustrating sometimes because they would ask me legal advice, and I'm not here to give legal advice. I'm giving business advisory advice. And while I can see legal issues, I know where to direct them. So it's really hard. Now, 3 years later, I can tell you, I've made a lot of progress to the point where now when I have conversations, people say, oh, you're a blockchain expert. And it's almost like, I'm now almost like offended, like, well, I'm a lawyer too, but no, you can have, what I've learned is, if you're not in the legal field, be comfortable with, I'm a business person with a legal background. And it's a great place to be, because you can see the legal issues and you can help solve them, but you're not doing all of the legal drafting. You can help advise, but it's like this careful area you have to play in, because I'm not licensed to be an attorney, and that's not my role when I'm an advisor to companies. And I try to remind companies of that. Sometimes they forget. There's a few that keep saying to me, We know you're not giving legal advice, but can you look at these contracts? And you're just like, oh my, like, it's really, really frustrating. But you know, they know you have the legal background. So
I think that's really good advice, because going to law school just gives you so many tools that it just opens so many doors. So I personally think that we should use it to our advantage and not feel like we're bound to sit in that role forever.
absolutely. And it's not for, like I said at the beginning, being a GC or business person, it's not for everybody. There are plenty of lawyers that really enjoy the purely contractual or intellectual property aspect of what they do, and they don't want to make the business decisions. They're not geared that way, trained that way. So it's just, it depends on what type of person you are, for sure.
Yeah, that's what makes it all so great, because what my strength is somebody else's weakness and the other way around.
Absolutely. Yes.
So can you tell us about how you got into teaching?
Sure. So again, that's sort of an evolutionary story, a lot like the way I talked about reverse mortgages. I was working at that large law firm for a decade, and we worked on large commercial portfolio deals. And as I became a senior associate at the firm, we would get these deals that were like 400 property deals, which means you have to do due diligence on 400 properties and have a team of junior level associates working on them and overseeing all, you know, there's a lot that goes into that, titles and surveys, and sometimes, you know, so I would find myself in this position where I'd be put in the lead, leading those junior level associates on those teams. And it's a big job because you have to go through every property, think about 400 properties, and make sure that your teams are properly reviewing all of the properties, that you're not missing something. I mean, there could be what if there's an environmental issue you miss or something like that? At the same time, you're working loan documents with usually it would structure with a partner. We're doing loan documents. You'd be the second to work on those loan documents. So it was a fantastic learning opportunity. But what I got from being the lead on those large level portfolio deals was that I really enjoyed working with the junior associates and the summer associates too, just teaching the summer associates from scratch as to what is a survey and what is title. And of course, bringing it up to the higher levels. So I realized, I was like, I love teaching. I just get this like excitement when I teach. And so when I was very lucky, I actually looked for a few positions and I was offered the position at the University of Central Florida. And I left my Wall Street firm after a decade to go become a professor in Florida. And I was living in New York at the time. And I remember people saying to me like, wow, like you're getting off the hamster wheel, because who leaves that job? I mean, I had a good life, but I just knew I had this passion for teaching. And so I did love it, and I'm doing it again now. But in life, you also have to grab opportunities. So when I got the job as the first GC at that other company, I also knew that to have the opportunity to start a company at an entrepreneurial stage that was planning eventually to grow and sell would only help my experience as a professor and a teacher. And I'm lucky in that I've been able to go back into being a professor. But so I really do enjoy it, but I also enjoy business. So I kind of like have this, I wear two hats.
What was it like for you going into, your first teaching job? Were there things that you wish you had known before you started that you know
No
now?
question. And no question. I don't know if you want to give any more depth to that question, but from what I'll tell you is it's a lot with technology. And today I'm almost a little embarrassed when I think about my first teaching job, because I went in there and I wrote on the whiteboard, and I didn't really know much about presentations. And so I do remember the beginning was pretty antiquated in the style in which I taught. I think I got up to speed fairly quickly. In fact, one of the things I even made myself do, you have to understand, this was in 2007 is when I started as a professor. And so I actually got a side job. I don't really talk about this much, at a college called Rasmussen College, teaching paralegals, legal writing. And one of the reasons I did that is because Rasmussen, it was completely online. I'm sure still is completely online. And in 2008, I decided, if I'm going to do this thing right, I need to know how to be a better remote instructor as well. So in 2008, and the reason I just been thinking about this a lot in the pandemic, I started to learn how to become a remote professor as well. And so again, looking back, I would say using technology, and making sure, the second thing is making sure I was at the level of the student's understanding. A lot of times when you are teaching, you take for granted what you know, and you have to make sure that you're not assuming certain things. And I know there were people in the classroom that would say, "Oh, I get that. Like that, this is so easy." But there's also, you have to make sure that you're grabbing everyone. So it's the various levels that you have to teach at. And so those are the two things that come to mind. But what's true about the second is it's also extremely true in executive education. You can have a room where you have a CTO who knows all about blockchain and an executive who's never heard of it, and you have to figure out, at what level do I teach? So it's a common question that continues to this day that I have to figure out.
What I think is so cool about teaching, and a lot of people probably don't know this, is that I was in your class in 2007 and you were a part of my journey. So as a, like before I even went to law school, and as a teacher, you have such an impact on people's lives that you don't even know that you have sometimes.
Right. And so it's one of the greatest pleasures, Sharon, honestly, is when I think about 2007. So you were in the early classes, and the fact, and I think about the people who have had an effect on, starting from those junior level associates, who a lot of them I still keep in touch with, to the early classes that I taught. And I mean, you kind of remember every class in their own way. And the people that you keep in touch with, and well, you may get to this in some of your questions, but it's the connections you're making as a professor are business connections years later. And you can't ever ignore that fact. The classmates you're meeting in your law school or college are your best business partners years later. And that's a lesson I have learned throughout life, is so you cannot look at your students as just students. These are people who you will be working with eventually. And it's the greatest feeling when you actually do work with former students, because you think about the impact that, wow, I had a little bit of an impact on them. And like you as a lawyer, you didn't look at me hopefully as an instructor and say, "Oh, that's what a lawyer is." Or there was another person in our class that year, and he ended up going into real estate finance, the commercial side. And I always think, and he's told me, I didn't know anything about structured finance until I took your class. And I know that he went into that because I talked about it and he got intrigued by it. And so those are the nuggets that as a professor, there's nothing else like it. You've made an impact on somebody else.
I think that's amazing. What would you say to someone who is thinking about making that step, but is not sure if they should?
To become a professor or teacher?
Yeah.
There's a few ways you can do it. Like I said, I learned to become a teacher in a law firm. So you actually can see, is this something, and even as a GC, I had a team of junior level associates. I started an internship program at my company. We had 10 interns. So there's ways that you can learn to see if you like and have the patience to instruct others. Not everybody does. I mean, it's funny because I have 2 children and I can see the differences in them. One has a passion and a patience for teaching, and the other, he's great at what he does, but it's not his forte. He doesn't really care to teach others. So you have to first see if it's something that drives you, moves you. And then if you really want to get into teaching or being a professor, as a lawyer, there can be opportunities for you to become an adjunct if you want to go that route. There's a lot of, I'm a big fan of online opportunities. So there's listservs as the professors have. And so I'm on a legal research and writing listserv where there's a lot of professors on there. And there's also practitioners on there. Then they write, I want to get into this area. How do I get into this area? And so there's a lot of professors on there that are giving advice. So you surround yourselves with the right networks to eventually get in. But you can't be afraid of dipping your toes in by something like an adjunct, or even what I did with Rasmussen. I dipped my toes into online, and it was completely foreign to me at the time, but I figured it out and I learned. And when we had to go fully remote last March, I mean, I had done other remote online since then, but I wasn't afraid of it.
Thank you for watching. Would love to hear your key insights and takeaways. Make sure to drop those into the comments below. Also, please follow me on my various social channels, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. If you do follow me on YouTube, please make sure you hit the little bell so you do get notified when new content is released, such as part 2 of the conversation I shared with Debbie. As always, if you are seeking further strategic guidance, please utilize me as a resource or take advantage of the content that I've made available to you, such as further episodes of The Inspired Attorney and tips and tricks on thinking above the line.